Today I'm going to be comparing PiHole to AdGuard Home. These are both applications that you can use to block ads and malicious websites network-wide. If you want to see what the differences are, then come check it out. I've been using PiHole for a number of years, and I was fairly recently told that I need to check out AdGuard Home. Now that comment made me wonder what the differences are between the two DNS blockers, and I figured if I was curious, others might be as well. So that's how this video was born. I've known for a long time that AdGuard Home existed, but I never really bothered to look into it because number one, I thought that AdGuard Home was proprietary, and number two, I was pretty happy with my PiHole setup. As it turns out, I was wrong about the first thing. AdGuard Home is an open source software, which has only increased my curiosity about the difference. So in order to compare these two, I've got a fresh install of both PiHole and AdGuard Home. These are both installed with the default settings on an LXC container on Proxmox. If you don't know what that is, it's not really important. The only thing that's really important is that these are basically the stock configuration. I guess we can start by comparing the two login screens. This is the AdGuard Home login screen. With this one, you need to have a username. However, you can only have the one user. So I guess the only real benefit of this is that you need to have a username and password pair, which is, I guess, slightly more secure. And the PiHole one, it's just the password. If I type the password incorrect. Now that I'm logged into both of these, I think it makes sense to start at AdGuard Home's killer feature, at least for somebody like me who has a young family. If we go to settings, there are two checkboxes here that I like. The AdGuard Parental Control web service will block adult content, and this Use Safe Search checkbox will force most modern search engines to use a safe search feature, which will also block adult or graphic content. And when I say most modern search engines, I don't even mean popular ones. Like, who the hell uses Ecosia? Now, this parental control checkbox is nice, but it's easily reproduced on PiHole by just adding a new list that has nothing but adult domains on here. And we'll get into that in a bit. But this safe search feature, I can't do the exact same thing on PiHole, at least not easily. Now, a quick Yandex search will show that there are people who have plugins for PiHole that will force safe search. But of course, in this comparison, I'm just showing the difference as is. So on PiHole, I mentioned that you can add block lists for adult content to get the same effect as AdGuard Home. And you can add any block lists that you find. So even if you go onto Reddit and look up PiHole block lists, there are some fantastic lists and where to find these block lists. This is another feature that some people who are not too familiar or don't want to have to go digging for it might appreciate AdGuard Home more for as well. So if we look at DNS block lists on here, they've only got one that's enabled by default, but you can add a block list just by choosing from a list here. This has all the big ones that I mentioned on Reddit, like Hagazi, I don't know how that's pronounced. These block lists are highly promoted on Reddit, as well as Stephen Black's block list. That's the default one that we've got on PiHole. And the OISD block list is also another very popular one. But they've also got a handful of other curated block lists on here. Some regional ones, some security ones. These are all really easy to enable. You just check it and save. That block list will be added and updated immediately. It's really not a lot harder to do that on PiHole, but you have to know where these lists are and how to get them. Here on GitHub, I've only ever used the Stephen Black lists, and I've been very happy with them because I've never had any issues with ads getting through. These Steven blacklists have things for fake news, gambling, porn, social media, and different combinations of. So if you wanted to block social media, you can click this link, copy this address right here, paste that URL in, call this one social media, add block list. I don't know why it didn't work the first time. Just trying it again, it worked. And if you want to block adult content, the Steven Black porn list is pretty good. However, adding lists is so much easier on AdGuard Home. Now, another feature of AdGuard Home that is unique to it is the ability to block services. So this blocked services tab has about 118 different services that you can block. You can block them all with one click here, or you can block individual applications. So if you need to block like extremely heinous services, like for example Cloudflare, you can block it individually, which is something you can do with PiHole as well. If I go to PiHole, we can go to domains. If we want to block Cloudflare.com, we can add this as a domain wildcard and add to denied domains, and you can get the same effect. What AdGuard has over PiHole, however, is the ability to schedule these blocking. So if you wanted to block, say, Cloudflare from, we'll say, 9 to 5, you can set a schedule for that, and you can have it say only Monday through Friday, and add the schedule. This is a really nice feature. It could be better because it's not very granular in its control. You can't say block Twitch from 9 to 11 and block YouTube from 3 to 5. You can't block from 9 to 11 and 12 to 5. You can only have one blockout period per day, and it's every service that's checked off. So you can't have individual schedules per service, but realistically speaking, this is probably going to be enough for most households, especially if this is intended for managing the use of little ones in your home. So I mentioned it before that both AdGuard Home and PiHole can have local DNS entries. So in PiHole, that's under Settings, Local DNS. So let's say that I have a reverse proxy that's running on my local network that has a web UI. I may want to point a domain to it, so let's just call this one, I usually call it proxy. And you would point it at the IP address of that reverse proxy. And then to save that, I just click the plus arrow and it adds a DNS entry. Now, if I had, say, several services that were running behind that, typically what I do is I would add a CNAME record and I'll point it to this domain. By adding that CNAME record, both of these domains will point to this same IP address. And if I've got this domain defined in my reverse proxy, it will direct that traffic to the right service. It's really quick and easy to set up local DNS entries. AdGuard also has a similar feature like that. They've got it called DNS rewrites. And in here, you don't have to know the difference between a DNS entry and a CNAME entry. So I'll do the same thing on this one. And so with that, I've created a domain that points to this IP address, and I can do a CNAME as well. So while it's not defined as a different type of DNS entry, it is clearly a CNAME record. This domain points to this domain. But the real killer feature about AdGuard Home's local DNS, at least for me anyway, is because of my use of a reverse proxy. If I create a wildcard entry by using an asterisk, with this entry here, anything that has a subdomain where this asterisk is will be forwarded to the reverse proxy. That means I can have one DNS entry for all of my services. I'll never have to add anything else. As I add services to my reverse proxy, it will automatically be forwarded to the right host. So I really like this. This is a one and done DNS entry for a home lab. Now, yet another feature that AdGuard Home has that PiHole doesn't, at least out of the box, is the encryption settings right here. With this checkbox, you should be able to enable encryption on AdGuard Home. And they say that this is a built-in feature, but it doesn't really work on its own. So if I were to enable encryption, you have to set a domain. So I'll just call this one DNS. And if I click Save Configuration, it doesn't work. In order to enable HTTPS or encryption in general on here, you need to have a certificate from, say, Let's Encrypt or another registered certificate authority. So since AdGuard Home doesn't have a built-in way to grab this certificate, I think it's disingenuous to say that it is built in. So, that being said, AdGuard Home really does have solid instructions on their documentation on how to pull a certificate from Let's Encrypt using CertBot, and it can work even if you're behind a firewall. If you do use their instructions, that means you're going to have to periodically update your certificate manually. I think it's 3 months it needs to be done. It is easy enough, and it can be done. PiHole, on the other hand, already comes with HTTPS enabled. However, it's using a self-signed certificate, so you will get this warning message, but it is working out of the box. If you want to grab your own certificate with CertBot, you can definitely do that on PiHole as well, and then you just point your config file to the appropriate certificate. Despite PiHole having HTTPS automatically enabled, the thing that gives AdGuard an edge over PiHole is the fact that AdGuard has DNS-over-HTTPS support. So once you've got encryption enabled with an appropriately signed certificate, AdGuard Home will serve DNS over HTTPS using the server name that you describe in the encryption settings. As long as the server name and the certificate match, you should be able to use DNS over HTTPS. Because some mobile devices prefer to use DNS over HTTPS, you would be able to point those devices to this server name for your DNS resolution, and you'd be able to block ads and malicious sites right from AdGuard Home. The same thing can be done on PiHole, but it requires a third-party app. And since I'm covering the differences of these things as they are built, I'm going to give AdGuard the win on this one. One of the features that some people might prefer about AdGuard Home is actually the upstream DNS server that it uses. And not so much the server itself, but the fact that it uses DNS over HTTPS for any DNS requests that are actually forwarded through. So that means that AdGuard Home is going to encrypt any DNS requests before it gets sent out to the upstream DNS server. PiHole, by contrast, does not use HTTPS. In fact, it has a built-in list similar to the ad lists on AdGuard Home, where you can check off which upstream DNS servers you want to use. So Quad9 has a filtered with DNS security, unfiltered, no DNS security, so on and so forth. And if you wanted to use, say, the filtered one, you could just check it off, uncheck Google's, which is the default, and then save it. But any DNS requests that are being forwarded from your PiHole are going to be sent out in plain text to the DNS server. That means that your internet service provider is going to be able to see which sites that you are looking up via your DNS. Now, I don't think that this is a huge security thing, since your internet service provider is going to be able to see which sites that you're going to in the end, because you're going to be requesting their IP address directly. And then the internet traffic that's being sent to these final IP addresses have what's called an SNI header, which also says in plain text which URL you're going to. The only way to block from your internet service provider which sites that you're actually going to is to use a privacy VPN. And if you're doing that, then you're basically just redirecting who gets to see where your internet traffic is going. So this is kind of a pick your poison situation. It's either going to be your internet service provider or your VPN provider. Some people say that privacy VPNs are more secure, which might be true for some of the paid ones. But if you're using a free VPN, chances are it's only free because they're collecting your data. Anyway, sorry for the tangent. If you do want to use DNS-over-HTTPS on PiHole, once again, it can be done, but it has to be done with a third party. So if the back-end encryption is important to you, AdGuard Home takes this one again. Another thing that is the same, but is done very differently between these two services, is being able to individually set settings for each client on the network. So you can have, for each individual device, different rules. So if I add a client here, let's say this is for my son's laptop. You would enter in an identifier here, which would be, as described here, their IP address, their MAC address. I haven't found the MAC address to work. I think that only works if you have the DHCP server running. But you would put in, let's just say, their IP address. And then we can define individual settings. So let's say for my son's laptop that we wanted to have parental control on, but not forcing safe search. We could also block very specific services just for this individual device. So I'll undo that. Let's say my son is spending too much money on Amazon. I wanted to block him from that. Then if I go to pause service, in here I can define a new schedule for when I want those services to be blocked. So let's say, yeah, sure. He gets 1 minute a day where he can use the service. Say I'm blocking it on Mondays and Tuesdays. We can just add that. And then the upstream DNS server, you can change that. That's specific to this device. And then once you've got all the settings changed that you want, you can hit save. There you see we've got the client, a descriptor of it, and that it uses custom settings. Now let's say I want to have different rules for my daughter. And let's say that because I have unique rules for my children, I want to have them have the same rules. I have to go through and enter in the unique rules for each and every one of their devices, even if it is the same as other ones. This is where PiHole, I think, has a leg up. So there's a list of known clients here. You can select one. If your client is on here, you just click it. If it's not, you can actually enter it in manually. And the comment is just a descriptor for it. And then you can assign them to a group. Now I haven't added any groups yet, so I'll just do that next. So I can call this one, say, kids, add. Let's say I have a work computer. I could call this one office or just work. And all of these different groups can have their own individual rules. So for example, with my son's laptop here, I can put him into the kids group. I'll apply that. Oops, take him out of the default. And then under the lists, I can apply each individual list by group. So let's say this one is applied to just the kids. Oh, and the office one. I can apply that. Then as you've got different devices added in, you put them into whatever group category you want. This way, you only have to define the rules once, and as you're adding devices, you can put them into whichever category you want. And it's easy to change them. Now, AdGuard is really close to having this functionality. When you go to Add Client, they do have the option to add tags. Now, as far as I can tell, these tags can only be used on custom filtering rules. You can add the tags here when you define the rules, but it doesn't apply to your DNS block lists. If you were able to add those tags to these lists, you'd be able to get a very similar functionality to PiHole. It'd be a little bit different yet, but it would be so much better than what AdGuard Home has right now. If we dig into the settings, like for example the DNS settings, I only showed you this page, but there are more settings further down. A lot of this stuff you'll never have to touch, but there's a fair bit here. If we take a look at PiHole on their DNS settings, it looks like there is so much less here, but that's because PiHole out of the box shows you just the basic settings. When we click this checkbox, a whole new world of settings opens up. In fact, this is just scratching the surface because this All Settings tab also shows up, and this brings in pages upon pages upon pages of DNS settings that you may or may not want to play with, but it allows you to dial in your settings to exactly what you want. Things like your logging settings, network time sync, what resolver you want to use, and on and on. AdGuard, when you compare the two, only has some pretty basic settings. Definitely more than enough for most people, but if you're the type who likes to tinker and get your fingers in all the settings, PiHole is definitely where it's at. So after comparing these two products, which ones should you use? Well, like most things, that depends. If you want something that's a little easier to configure and is more set it and forget it, I think AdGuard Home kind of takes the cake on this one. I think with its built-in AdGuard lists and parental protection, this one is great for somebody who's trying to protect their family. It mostly has all the features that anybody could ever want built right in. If you're the type of person who likes to peek under the hood and make small adjustments, then maybe PiHole's the one for you. There are things that I didn't really cover in this video, things like pairing it with Unbound, which is a self-hosted DNS resolver, or how you can configure PiHole to use DNS-over-HTTPS. But these all require extra software and add-ons. So if you're a build-it-yourself kind of person, you may prefer PiHole. And for any of those who may ask, which one am I going to use? The answer is both. For any devices that my children are using, I'm going to direct them to AdGuard Home. The parental protections on it are fantastic, and I don't think I can quite copy it on PiHole. For the rest of the devices in my home, I'm going to use PiHole. I like the fact that I can go in and poke and play and tweak the settings, and wreck and find out what I've done wrong, and go in and fix it and try and tweak it again. I learn the most from breaking things and trying to put them back together. So this is going to be my playground. I may, for that very reason, have to put all my wife's devices on AdGuard Home as well. So that's what I consider to be the biggest differences between these applications. I hope you found it informative. Let me know if you're using a DNS ad blocker, and if so, which one you're using. In the meantime, my name's Kyle. This is Hardwood Home Lab, and I'll see you in the next one. Man, I almost forgot to show the most important setting on PiHole.
Engage.